back at it. We are going to do our best. I'm going to post a comment. Let's see. Resources can be found on my website. At www.welcome folks, come on back. All right. We are going to live with Henry. It will work for us. Connecting. Huzzah!
Hey, I don't know what happened.
We did it. Oh, you know what? Okay, my headphones aren't connected. I will be back in a moment. Give me 1 sec. I have everything I need.
It looks like there was a little bit of a technical glitch, but it happens. It's okay.
It happens. We're working through it. Why not?
Happy Thursday, Lex. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. How are you doing today, Henry?
Good. I see you're outside. I was going to say that the weather's still a little bit chillier than I would like it to be, but I'm just in the right mindset. I mean, the sun's been out. I'm feeling spring. It's all good. It's all good.
Yes. Yeah, I figured I may as well take in what I have here because it's supposed to rain later today. So
there you go. Hey,
why not do the live outside? Exactly.
Absolutely. And you know what? This is our third one out of 4. So I'm in a way, I'm super excited that we're 3 in. And then I'm a little sad that this is the second to last one because we won on Sunday. Based on people's feedback, I'm sure we'll come back at another time and do some other things because there's a lot of information that we know we are not going to be able to get to in 4 episodes of this mini web series, right? So it's okay.
Yeah.
And I've enjoyed these so much. I think that for those folks that are joining for the first time, these have been awesome for me because they just sort of reaffirm the beauty that it is of human connection, of people getting together and doing the best they can with the best of intentions to understand each other. And I will say this, as I said in every episode, I love, love, love my transgender friends. And I just think that you guys are beautiful, you're brave, you're courageous, you're pushing the envelope, and you're making the rest of us better because of it. Thinking about how the universe and nature creates us all in this amazing breath of range and abundance and everything else. So it's all good.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed.
Right?
Yes. And so for today, episode 3, our topic is transition avenues. And so what we mean by this is that as many folks may be aware, transgender folks may choose to transition. And that can look like so many different things, so many different avenues, which is why we chose that as our title. It is not true. I would like to just knock down a myth real quick that in order to be trans, you have to medicalize your body because that is indeed never the case. But
which, by the way, is what I thought.
Option.
That's what I thought. That the term transition literally was boxed into sort of a medical. Yep. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we are going to be addressing 3 ways that folks, if they have the safety and ability to transition and the desire, they can transition socially, medically, and or legally. So we're going to address those 3 different avenues, and whatever questions Henry has, whatever questions folks have that are joining us, just let us know.
Yeah, so thank you for teeing that up. And I'm glad you put it in that order because I would imagine that what every transgender person does go through is a social transition. So that at least is probably a common denominator, right? So tell me a little bit about what that means. And really what I'd like to get educated on too is the challenges that the transgender person socially transitioning sort of right up front starts to face, the difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely. And before even diving into that part of the conversation, I want to make a very big note for everyone to keep in mind as we're talking that just because these are options, the social, legal, and medical, that doesn't mean that they are necessarily available to folks who are not able to come out for safety reasons, who are stealth because if they came out as a trans person, they may experience discrimination in the workplace, through medical providers, at school, work, etc. And so I want, although yes, we will be talking about the social, legal, and medical just range of options that folks have, we need to keep in mind that just because these options are seemingly available, whether or not folks are able to go down those different avenues is based on the privileges and the safeties and the supports that they have. So we must keep that in mind.
That's awesome. Thank you for reminding us, because while some people may want to, it's dangerous or unsafe or what. Yeah, that's an important point. Thank you.
And especially with financial resources. So even whether it's all aspects of whether it's social, legal, or medical have a financial component. So starting with social transition, when we say social transition, we're referring to someone deciding to potentially, whether it's change their name, their gender expression, right, the clothes that they're wearing, their haircut, potentially mannerisms, pronouns. Those would all fall under the umbrella of social transition, because it's things that we do in our social spaces to be the most authentic version of ourselves. And so, and for me, that was the first step in my transition, was deciding that I wanted to go by Lex, deciding that I wanted to go with they, them pronouns. And none of this was, I was like, oh, 100% this is going to fit for me. I was scared when I said, like, I want people to only refer to me as Lex and only use they, them pronouns, because it's something that I have never done before. It's something that I was worried, well, am I going to want to go back to this name? Or am I going to want to use these pronouns? Am I going to be X? Like, all of those thoughts ran through my head. But I eventually decided for myself that I needed to try it to know if it's what I needed for me.
So Lex, that's sort of what you're describing there, is that internal dialogue and anxiety around you, yourself, and how you wanted to identify, express, and all of that. And it's funny because I'm going to make it analogous to a gay man, which is what I am, a gay man's experience internally. Am I really gay? How am I going to come out? What does that mean? So there's that internal, I want to call it struggle. But then there's the anxiety, I would imagine, and tell me a little bit about the anxiety around who you're going to do this with first. And if you start down this road, you talked about it, if you're going to start wearing different clothing to express yourself as a transgender person, do you do it at work, or you don't do it at work and then you just do it maybe with some friends? Do you choose? Like, there's got to be an enormous amount of stress and anxiety, depending again on if you're not in an environment that's supportive, if you're scared for your safety or bullying or discrimination, that's got to come into play in how heavy this can be for the person, right?
Absolutely. And that is a large part. Another kind of what I was trying to lightly touch about, how like folks, their ability to use a different name will depend on, are they like, did they grow up in a home or an environment, whether it's the home environment with family or guardians, or the school environment, or both, where you're receiving messages that are only negative about trans people, or you're experiencing only messages that spread hate or ignorance about queer identities. And so folks who are in those environments may not be safe to even take the step to say, like, I know that my name is X and that my pronouns are Y, but because of receiving those messages and being fearful of losing, whether it's the financial, the social, the emotional support from the school environment, from the home environment. And so many folks aren't even able to take that step to say, hey, like, I don't want long hair, I want to have short hair, because their guardians or the folks who are in their lives are very controlling over their bodies and what ideals and gender roles look like.
And that's got to be hard. And I'm thinking of situations in my life, right, where I was with groups of people. I remember one time in an airport, one of those airport food courts. And I was on a business trip with a couple of other people, and someone walked by just in the corridors, and one of the persons I was with made a comment about, oh my God, I can't tell if that's a man or a woman, like this person that was walking down. And it started down this whole conversation where the transgender conversation came up about this one person was coming and saying, yeah, it's so impossible to tell men from women these days and everything. And I just personally looked at the person and my heart broke because, and I hope I'm not offending anyone by saying this, but as I looked at that person, it was a little obvious to me that that person was in some kind of state of transition. If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
I know what you're saying. I want you to keep going before I jump in.
Yeah, and I got really nervous about what I was thinking and if I was being offensive. Like, this person seemed to me, again, my societal conditioning, it seemed to me like someone that maybe expressed themselves, was trying to go from like a masculine like expression to more of a feminine expression of gender. And to the people I was with, and a little bit to me too, like it was a little jarring because as the person walked by, I was like, oh my God, is that a trans? And I felt terrible for thinking that. Does that make sense? That I couldn't tell what that person, like, is that a transgender person? Or, yeah, I couldn't tell if they were male or female, or if they used to be male and now trying to express it. And I'm getting the terms all wrong and everything, but I just felt awful about what I was thinking.
So I have a couple of things to say. Firstly, you are not alone. That is a process that every person kind of goes through. Whether you're cis or trans, gay or straight, whatever identities you are, because humans are social creatures, when we are in social spaces, we either subconsciously or consciously make assumptions about the people that we are around, which evolutionarily was our way of determining whether an environment we were in was safe, if there was food, if there was a potential mate, all of that. And so we've kind of taken on this evolutionary mind of making quick assumptions to know what type of social situations we're in. However, we're not getting chased by bears anymore. We're not necessarily going to have to forge. So our need to make these assumptions is not by any means necessary or crucial anymore. And so although it's completely natural to like have those subconscious or then bringing to the forefront of, oh, like this person, like when I'm registering them, like I can't place them in a binary, right? Like we make assumptions. However, what I would recommend is pushing against your own mind when you see that you are asking yourself what someone else's gender identity is. Because regardless of if this person was to a T aligned with societal norms for a specific gender or not, why do we care about what their gender is?
Yeah, I guess I could have just asked that person. Right, that would have been intrusive, though. As a stranger walking down some airport food court corridor, but I just caught myself making those assumptions, like just automatically, boom, 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 boom,
Yeah, and so, I mean, the thing is, we all make those assumptions, but the thing that we need to start to do is ask ourselves, why do we want to know about someone else's identity? What business is it of ours to know something so personal? And the truth is that whether, like I said before, like whether this person looked like a stereotypical societal ideal for a man or looked like a societal representation of the ideal for a woman or somewhere in between, whichever version of that person, we still have no idea what their gender identity is just based on how they're expressing themselves.
You're right. It was just like a total, complete automatic bias that was registering automatically with me. And I'll say one other thing, and again, I'd be being very raw here. I don't want to trigger in people that might be listening or not, like emotional responses, but like I also had another situation where I was speaking to someone, and the person that I'm speaking to, and again, this goes to my biases, was presenting themselves, and I'm assuming female, gender, okay?
So woman would be the gender term, and then female would be the sex term.
Yes, woman, as woman from a gender expression perspective. And
so wait, if you say gender expression, you are referring to feminine.
Oh, okay, yeah. So Okay, I see how I garbled it all up. I'm trying to
But that's okay. That's
describe.
why we're here. That's why we're
But the
here.
person really was transitioning because I got into a conversation with them and I was making all sorts of crazy assumptions. It's like, you know, woman gender, um, very short cropped hair, the voice was deep, and I didn't know, like, my mind was just spinning. And all I was doing was I was so afraid of opening my mouth and saying something really stupid to this person, you know?
Right. And so
And
if
then I
you,
learned that this person was transitioning, by the way, from a medical perspective, as we got into the conversation. Yeah.
right. And so something that I would say for folks who are like having a conversation with someone, right, that they otherwise didn't know before, it's a new conversation. So like you were just describing, what I always recommend is starting by saying what your name is and what your pronouns are, and then asking the other person what their name and their pronouns are. That way you can at the very least know what language to use when referring to that person in a conversation. But also it's really important to know that just because you know someone's pronouns doesn't necessarily mean you know their gender identity, because there are plenty of non-binary people who use both binary and gender neutral pronouns. There are people who just decide to use any pronoun and they could identify with one gender and they're just pronoun indifferent. And so, but the first step would always be to make sure that we're using the language that is the most affirming or is the safest language if we don't know what the most affirming language may be. So before knowing what this person's gender was, and because we do not want to be invasive or triggering of someone, an easy way to get a better idea of the language we should be using to affirm and respect the folks that we are in conversation with would be to say, like, this is, oh, I forgot to say, like, this is my name, these are my pronouns, would you be comfortable sharing your name and pronouns?
Okay, so Lex, what can allies like myself do to ease the social transition of a transgender person? What are some tips that like to help them and be supportive of what's happening?
Yeah, so I would definitely say that I think that everyone, ally, whether you're cis, trans, queer, straight, etc., the thing that we can all be doing to make social transitioning a safer and more inclusive environment for all would be to openly challenge and dismantle the myth that in order to be trans, you have to medicalize your body. Because that's the first myth that all, or most, I'll say most, trans folks hear from media, hear from the different societal messages about what it means to be trans, or the only way or the right way to be trans. And the truth is that there is not one way to be trans. There's no such thing as what a trans man, what a trans woman, what a genderqueer person looks like. And so I would say that for allies that are watching this, or anyone, one thing we can do to make social transitioning more accessible and an actual option to folks is by talking about the importance of being in a safe environment where folks are able to make these decisions about their own bodies, about their own identities, and be able to live their truth in that way.
I love that because, again, here I'm thinking, you know, when you and I first connected and we talked to some of your fans about this, when you and I first spoke and we had my podcast, you were on my podcast as a guest, from a transition perspective, you had not made any decisions about some kind of medical transition. And then when we connected months later, you had obviously in the interim period of time made some decisions that took you down that path. So good for me to know that, as dumb as it sounds, I actually did think that every transgender person was on some kind of journey to ultimately medically transition. And
that's not dumb at all, because that is the message that we are told.
Yeah.
That especially, I mean, think about how these, within the age of technology, so much of the information that we are taking in and that are forming our minds, our lenses, our ways of interacting with people is coming from media. And media, being a tool of an imperialist tool, pretty much, or a capitalist tool, will always favor those who are in power, who are the same folks who discriminate,
so their
marginalize,
judgments, their values, their everything get imposed on everybody else. Yeah,
exactly. And so knowing that that's what the environment that we all grew up in, and we were told this wrong message, especially, I mean, thinking about the pros and cons of Caitlyn Jenner coming out and making her her journey so visible. It was great because it gave a voice to just public awareness of trans people's existence. But then a con of that voice was the heightened attention and focus on changing her body. Because the truth is that whether she was taking hormones, whether she was getting facial feminization or breast augmentation or some form of vaginoplasty or whatever types of medicalization, she doesn't need any of those things to be the strong, powerful woman that she is. Great point,
but you're right. There were pros and cons to that. You're right. That was a huge con that immediately people just harped on that aspect of what was going on. And like, so let's talk about medicalization, because I would imagine that's also huge range of the choices and decisions that a transgender has before them if they choose and decide to go down that road. This is also an area where I'm assuming, right, financial resources comes into play big time.
Yes. I definitely believe that there is a heightened financial component to the medical realm of transitioning versus the legal and the social. But it's also important to note that, think about like a haircut costs money. Needing to change your entire wardrobe costs a hefty sum of change. And needing to or wanting to find ways to express ourselves externally, right? So all those things still cost money. But
you're saying that even aside from the medicalization, even from a social transition perspective, there are heavy resource costs potentially there too.
Oh, 100%, 100%. Yeah. And actually, even before we go into the medical realm, I'm actually going to skip to the legal realm, because in this realm, you also have financial commitments in order to be able to even file for a legal name or gender change. So you have to continuously file in order to, if you are lucky enough to get your change approved, then you need to submit other paperwork to the multiple different government offices for passport, for birth certificate, for state ID, your credit cards. All of these things are separate costs, are separate fees. Of course, there are organizations that do pro bono work, which is fantastic, and there are tons of information out on the internet on how one can do that independently. But a lot of times it's so difficult that you may want to seek a lawyer, and then obviously having a lawyer is going to be another financial expense.
Yeah, wow, it just seems like I don't want to call them obstacles, but like one thing after another. So I get back to like the supportive aspect, right? Like, and it breaks my heart to think, and obviously so many people that are in unsafe environments and everything, but I just saw a comment that someone put up saying like the first thing they got asked by one of their teachers was like, well, are you going to get the surgery? As if there's one surgery. I think someone said there that like, oh, here's the surgery that takes care of the entire sort of medicalization aspect of this stuff, which makes no sense at all. But what about some of the medicalization angles to this? And I'm coming from like, who gives you permission? Permission meaning like, can you just go to a doctor and say, oh, if it's someone that wants breast augmentation or whatever, can you just do that? Like, I know like in the hetero world, if you will, if a female or a woman wants bigger breasts because she wants to look sexier, there doesn't seem to be a lot you need to do other than have a lot of money and go to some plastic surgeon and get that done, if I'm right. Or like what insurance covers. I'm a guy, right? Let's say whatever, and I need those Viagra pills. Like they just give them out like candy. But it seems like for transgender people, they make it incredibly hard for them to get the things they want to get. Is that make sense?
Yes, no, I absolutely hear what you're saying. So everything that I'm going to say is very general, which it's difficult because the policies and the laws or the regulations for medical care or healthcare in general are dependent on if you have medical insurance, what state you're in, what policies you have. And so I don't have like
meaning whether these procedures are covered or not, right?
Right. And it's not even whether the procedures are covered or not, but it's the accessibility of, so I'll start by giving an example. If you are in a rural area then are there any medical providers within an hour radius from where you are that even know what transgender people are?
Yeah, that could even identify in a supportive way through the process. Yeah, that's a great point. And
Or if you're in an urban center, but you're in a conservative place, you may have access to a plastic surgeon, but that plastic surgeon may not be able to take your insurance or may refuse to take your insurance because you are a trans person, and that state may or may not have trans healthcare included in that insurance policy or not.
what about this whole thing? Like, I remember when the DSM, this is the book that sort of psychologists use to diagnose disorders, used to consider being gay or homosexual a disorder, right?
Yes.
What about this issue? Because I've seen stuff on TV and I read in the news about when someone, a transgender person, may want to start down the road of medicalization, that there's all kinds of psychological counseling and everything that's required to make sure that they are ready and can, so that someone signs off and says they're not going to change their mind because some of this might be permanent. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is that still like the way this works?
So similarly, it is dependent on like state, district, what medical insurance you have, who your medical providers are. But more generally, yes. So for instance, for me to have top surgery, I needed to have either 1 or 2 letters from I know I had one from my therapist stating that that my therapist was like, I have been seeing Lex for X amount of time. They have consistent gender dysphoria, so gender dysphoria is actually in the DSM as an experience that trans people face due to the lack of support from people in society.
Yeah, it's
so
as
it's
a
not
consequence of society, right? It's a consequence.
Right.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's not saying that trans people have a mental illness. It's saying that trans people, I'm back. It's saying that trans people, whereas before I was saying, it was gender.
Well, you're saying that rather than it being a gender dysphoria, that it's not a disorder, but what you're saying is you experience that discomfort or stress because society is imposing so much moral judgment or whatever on who you are.
Exactly.
Right?
And so because of that distress, that's pretty much the term that is currently used now and is in the DSM, saying that if a trans person is experiencing distress based on the gender identity, which is labeled gender dysphoria, then depending on what their internal needs are, right? Are they trans masc, trans femme, androgynous, etc.? What things do they need for their bodies to be comfortable and to whether completely eliminate or at least decrease the amount of distress that folks are having in their own bodies?
And do you have to sign, I hate to put it this way, but do you have to like sign your life away when you decide to go through some of these medicalization procedures? Because I'm now thinking like the way society is, oh, I'm the doctor and I'm going to do this for Lex, and then she's going to come back and sue me, or she or they, and they're doing all this confusing. First of all, that's making you feel awful, I would imagine. But we do live in this sort of heavily legalistic society. What's that process? How long does that process take?
Yeah, and so I can only speak off of my own experiences, which is limited to the trans masc realm. But for me, I had a easy breezy time getting on testosterone because my mom, who is a medical provider at Temple, knew of an internal medicine physician who also, who a medical provider who is a provider for trans patients. So it's like the primary care physician for many trans patients. So
and did you have to pay extra for the testosterone, or was that included in your health care?
My testosterone is included under my insurance.
Okay.
Which
you
is
have
great.
Insurance, yeah.
Right, so I have insurance under my mom, who works at Temple University Hospital, and my primary care physician, who I switched to, was a trans competent physician in Philly, who then I asked all of my questions. We talked about the pros and cons, the things that I want, like the things that I wanted to go on T for, and the reasons why I was maybe hesitant to go on. Did a lot of internal thinking and self-processing.
So I mean, you have a lot of privilege, and I know you acknowledge that.
100%.
If there might be people then that want to get the testosterone, let's say, for example, that might have to come out of their pocket potentially.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And so, and that's the same thing as, so for instance, I'm just going inside to get a charger because my phone is about to die. But so the truth is that depending on all like the medical insurance, what providers you have, what type of competency there is, I always say to do as much background research as physically possible. And so on my website, which I have linked below, I actually set up an entire page for this episode that has specific resources looking at medical insurance and what surgeries are covered by medical insurance. Or if you don't have medical insurance, different organizations that can help you get medical insurance. And so I have tons of links that look at like what your state's rights are, what the laws are. I have PDFs of if you are someone who is assigned, so for instance, I have one that's technically called a MTF and then a FTM guide that talks about what the hormone replacement therapy looks like for the folks who are changing based on those specific hormones.
If you need testosterone or estrogen or whatever it is you might be looking to get. Okay.
Right. And so I highly recommend folks looking on my website for those resources because it's the most important part is making sure that you are your own best advocate and seeking these resources that are peer-reviewed, that are scholarly articles that are coming out of the medical field so that there is backing behind them. There is actual information that you can use to understand what the changes would be for your own body and if you are ready and able to take that next step. Or even if you want to. A lot of folks don't want to medically transition, and that is perfectly valid.
Right. Now, we've talked about that's neither here nor there. I mean, that doesn't make you any less transgender than anyone else. You know, we're at time, and as usual, we covered a lot, and I think I learned a lot, and it just proves that these conversations, like, it's never ending because they shouldn't be, because there's so much to learn, and we need to just be aware and conscious of what's going on. And, you know, all I want to do is understand and be a better ally. And I think we're doing that. So I want to thank you again for this awesome time and the space we've created.
Yes, and actually before you close us down, I am going to make one more little comment. Something that you had said before, I just want to address the language use. When you were talking about the lovely human who you were going through this, like, I don't know if this is a man or a woman, or if this person's female or male, or what, or like, what is this person's gender expression? For that example, you said, you use a language that the person looked like they were in transition. And so something that I would say is that we are all constantly in transition, whether you are cisgender or trans. We wake up every day in our bodies and we have to constantly do body modifications, whether that's showering or putting something in our hair or the ways that we choose to dress ourselves. And so I would push back against that statement saying, well, that person's in transition, but so are you. And so what makes that person any different?
Yes. Why single them out when I'm doing the same damn thing in a different way every damn day I get up? I love it. That's a big takeaway for me. So thank you. Thank you for that one. Awesome. Well, as always, it's awesome talking to you. Yeah. And Sunday, want to remind everyone, we're doing our 4th. And it will be really about creating like safe spaces and language, right? Like we've termed that one inclusion, right? How can allies be more inclusive so that transgender people feel like they belong as much and just like everybody else? So looking forward to that. Have a great weekend, everybody. And we'll check, you and I will connect again on Sunday. Okay?
Absolutely. Tune in on Sunday, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.